Yeah, and I think that that's very, I mean, honestly, society has a very difficult time um, understanding who you are if you don't have a job title attached to you. So that definitely contributes to his invisibility. But I would say I'd be very careful around that kind of conversation because I do think that it's incumbent on you or me as a person to combat that by having a better belief system internally that
Yeah.
you have the value, and that part of that is fighting from internal as well as the external. You're at a cocktail party and they say, what do you do? And you say, I'm retired, and then they're on to the next person because
Yeah.
whatever. And that's unfortunately the reality. It's there.
Welcome to another Finishing Strong podcast. If you haven't joined us before, Finishing Strong is dedicated to helping people transition from working full-time to something else and to integrate their faith with their new purpose. I'm excited today to be joined by twins, Cynthia and Leslie from Toronto, Ontario. These two sisters have formed an organization called Twinagers, which, like Finishing Strong, provides resources to people during this later season of life. Cynthia, Leslie, and I met just a few weeks ago when we all attended an online workshop from the Modern Elder Academy called Reframing Retirement. We found out we have a ton in common and we have similar passions to help people navigate this time in our lives when transition, ageism, and uncertainty can dominate our thoughts. I know you will enjoy our time today with the Twinagers. Hey, I'm excited today to have two guests with me. First time I've ever done two. Maybe a little obvious to those of you who are watching video that they are twin sisters, Cynthia Hyde and Leslie White from Canada. And we met a couple weeks ago when we were both participating in a Modern Elder Academy event. And I was trying to make some connections through there for the podcast, and I saw one of you, and then a box a little bit nearby. I saw the other one. I thought, wait a minute, these guys look alike. So crept on you, and then pretty quickly came to find out your initiative called Twinagers. And based on what I've looked at, you guys have been leading this initiative since the spring. And your website tells some interesting stories, individual stories that you've collected. But take me back to what started this. I mean, you told some stories about yourself, first of all, but what was the part of the transition from, hey, this is an idea, to let's run with this? What did that look like for you guys?
So I'll start, and Synth can
Yeah.
chime in. It is harder with two, I'm gonna say, but anyway, it really was a confluence of two things for us. One is the stage of life that we found ourselves in. We just crossed that 60 barrier.
Yeah.
Had lots of discussions about what's next in life. But it was at a time where both of us were at crossroads with respect to our working worlds and, thinking about, like I had just recently, and I put it in quotes, retired. Synth had started her own business, is thinking, when does that end? Is it 5 years, 10 years? Is it tomorrow? That sort of thing. So all those discussions happened at the same time as the pandemic landing. So we are the first to say we were our own bubble. Remember the bubbles that we were all asked to? Canada was pretty crazy with respect to what they did in the pandemic. So in the early stages, we were to, have a bubble where you could actually have your social interaction, and you weren't supposed to go outside of your bubble. So there was a lot of time to discuss it. So those two things, though, they really kept bubbling up in our conversations. during that time is what is the next part of our life look like, and how do we want to actually contribute?
Well, and I think just to add on, the discussions took on, both Les and I have been, in different industries, but very successful within our own industries. So two things: one, facing the feeling of being aged out, number one, and number two, not knowing what that next piece is. And for someone that has always climbed the corporate ladder or always knew what your next step was, that's really an uncomfortable kind of feeling. So those two things took on real importance when we started talking, going, what do we care about? What do we want to see? What do we want to leave behind? Like, all those questions started to take on more importance, and we debated them during the entire pandemic, and then landed on Twinagers.
Yeah. Something you just said just reminded me of a conversation earlier this morning I had with a friend, and she was talking about working for a CEO, and we'd worked together in the past when this guy was not a CEO, and now he is. And so it was interesting, her comment. It was similar to what you said, Cynthia, which was, he spent his whole life getting to this point, and now he's here. And so now he's trying to figure out what here it looks like and feels like. And that's kind of where we are, right? At this season, where when I get older, I will. And here we are. In that.
Yeah.
So do you guys do a lot of life together outside? Are you like social friends and hang out all the time, and your husbands are best friends, all that stuff?
Yeah.
And
we do. We're very lucky that way, and our husbands are very good friends. We travel a lot together, which is very special. And Les has just bought a new house right around the corner from me.
I
like to think that's the main reason, but no, we do a lot. Like, it's daily. I mean, this is.
So you've had it your whole life. Does it continue? Oh, you guys must be twins. You guys must be sisters, or whatever it is.
I would say. Yeah, whenever we travel, actually, one of the first words we learn in the language of the country is twins, so that we get it out of the way when we sit down and have a drink. Okay, let's just get it out of the way. Yes, we're twins, right?
We are twins.
Yeah.
Let's talk about let's get past the obvious here. Well, I love your mission. I'm gonna just read the three pieces of your mission real quickly, and then let's unpack it. One, to change the social narrative around aging and challenge the definition of what is old. So that's number one. Number two, build awareness of ageism and ensure it is embedded in the diversity portfolio framework. And then three, champion intergenerational respect and mutual understanding. Changing the narrative starts with impacting younger generations by showing them that aging should be embraced and celebrated. Wow, that's a lot, and a lot of good stuff. So let's talk about the first one, changing the social narrative around aging and challenge the definition. What is the social narrative around aging that you want to change?
So, I think it's everywhere with us, and it's in society, but it's also internalized in a lot of us, the narrative around aging. And the negative part about it is all of a sudden, you're losing your ability, you're losing your creativity, you are not able to contribute. It's all this downward spiral of loss that is definitely out there. And I think it starts right from the get-go. There's fear about aging, and the young or the youth is like, oh, I don't ever want to be old, and there's no respect around that whole thing. So the narrative, I think, really needs to pivot. It needs to change. It's a very negative downward spiral piece that we're seeing on both ends, in the young and the old.
So Cynthia, how are you changing the narrative? What is the narrative going to be changed to, besides maybe the opposite of everything Leslie just said?
Well, I think it's about reframing it in a more positive perspective, and we try to do that through what we're calling our magic hour stories. So it's trying to highlight people's people's stories that are in what we define the magic hour, which is sort of 55-ish plus, although it can go a bit younger, it can go quite a bit older. So we're trying to humanize people, people's stories and their experiences, but not every single one is great. Like, this isn't about just showcasing amazing, inspiring stories, because there's lots out there, and we do shine a spotlight on those, but it's the everyday voice that we're trying to get after. Because when we did our research around what was kind of out there, we saw a lot of celebrities, we saw a lot of C-suite people that are really putting their attention to aging issues, which I think is wonderful, and they have a platform and they should still keep doing it. But there didn't seem to be a lot of places to house the everyday person in terms of how are they dealing with these transitions and these challenges and opportunities that present themselves. So we like to think that we will help change the social narrative by shining a light on everyday people that are in this space and living life, sharing their lived experience.
Yeah, and I think also just to add on that, and one really important aspect of it is the everyday person, but it's also not everyone is having an inspirational time at 65, 75. So we want to be really frank about the ups and downs and really talk about there are challenges along the way, so that it's more reality than, whoopee.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful. So, Cynthia, you mentioned the magic hour, and I know you talk about that in part of your manifesto, but let's go ahead and I want to go to that now since you mentioned it. But unpack magic hour. I love that. And yet you've also said there's some time in here which is difficult. So what's the magic hour to you guys?
So the magic hour came up again when we were trying to kind of define who we're talking to. It's great to say we want to talk to the young and the old, but sometimes it's like, whoa. We started looking at what each cohort was called. So you were either, for women experiencing perimenopause and menopause, and then all of a sudden you were elderly or senior. There didn't seem to be anything in between. So we went down this huge rabbit hole of an exercise. Oh my God, trying to come up with what to call that. And we came up with magic hour because we just think that it has a connotation around it that is a little bit inspiring. There's a little bit of wisdom in it, and a little bit of everybody strives for, a magic hour, whether it's a sunset. I work in film, so magic hour is the epitome of what we want to be shooting with, because it makes everything beautiful.
There
was just a lot around the word we liked, and we didn't want to go into the space where it was elderly or senior. Does that say that less?
Yeah, and also golden, like just sort of we didn't want it to have any connotation of sailing off into the lovely golden sunset. Like magic can happen in all sorts of different forms. So it really did, like, the rabbit hole was large on that. But when we initially went out, we had a tremendous response to that terminology. And, when we first went out, we said, oh, let's just try and see what's happening. And I would say it was overwhelmingly positive to say, yes, magic is it. Magic hour. I have so much more I want to do. Magic, like, this is magic. So I think it's a nice terminology that we're playing in, but time will tell.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's consistent with some of the Pew research which is out there, which is saying that those of us who are in this season are recognizing it as maybe the best season of our life in lots of ways. I mean, absent some serious health conditions and transitions or involuntary transitions and those kinds of things. But overall, as we empty nest and we don't have to commute into work every day, we get to have some of the freedoms of doing some of the things we liked. Gosh, it actually was kind of a pretty good season. So that magic hour really resonates. I go to a large church, and we're trying to figure out kind of how to create this cohort at church, and how to kind of have a whole, church within a church a little bit for people in our season. And so we've said we're not going to do anything retirees, we're not going to do anything grandparents. So we're kind of just making it binary over 60, right? So it's some line in there, but I think there's a lot in our world and in the modern academy world where we're reframing so much of this that we don't really want some of those old words to come around that define us as old and put us in a box. And the younger generation in particular might see the senior, the golden years, or whatever they are. Like, no, I still got a lot of enthusiasm in front of me and a lot of runway to keep going. So don't put me in the old person box. Right?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you talk about the other part of your mission, and this is a deal we're all dealing with. I want to see how you guys experience building awareness around ageism, and then ensure it's embedded in the diversity portfolio framework. I, as head of HR for a company, are constantly thinking about diversity, and this is one of those aspects among the other areas where we try to grow the diversity. But where are you guys experiencing ageism in your day-to-day life? How does that feel or look for you guys?
Well, that's such a tough one, because I think the ageism definitely is what spurred us to take on this initiative. We both felt it within our careers. Now that I've educated myself on what ageism really is and how it manifests internally and externally, honestly, it's everywhere. And it really is everywhere. And I think the first place that I started with it is to really examine my internal beliefs about age and how I operate on a day-to-day basis, and how it makes me feel and go on. So I did quite a bit of work on that. I know Cynthia and I have talked about it quite a bit, and that took some work to reframe in your mind the whole ageist language, how you view things, what your assumptions are when you see someone. And I'm not just talking about an elderly person, I'm talking about younger people as well. So I think a lot of the work on the ageism day to day has to come first within examining your internal beliefs on how you think and view, like, an older person walking down the street, or a younger person, on their cell phones, and how you actually react to that kind of thing is important.
And then I think the other side is we tend to think about it first and foremost in our work lives, because that's where it presents itself and you feel it most dramatically. I'm still working full time at the film company that I have, and I see ageism everywhere. I see it in terms of the people that are getting hired. I see it in terms of the messaging, the brand messaging that comes my way that wants to go out there, and how they cast against that. Like, I see it every single day. So to that end, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of how society is putting these messages out there. And I think there's an enormous opportunity to go inside each industry, whether it's through their HR departments or through their communication departments or whatever. There's companies that are small and large. And one thing that I think larger companies are starting to pay attention to is age as part of their diversity portfolio. But smaller companies don't necessarily have HR. So how do you get to them? So again, that's something that Les and I are putting our heads together on, is like, what can we build and create that would be an easy kind of, I mean, the simple idea is a toolkit that you can create and pass on and, whatever. But wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a world where talking about how you age within your profession, whatever that chosen profession is talked about when you're 30? when you're 35, when you're 45. So those are questions we're asking. How do you insert that into the work environment, whether it's a small organization to a large organization?
You know, as you're talking, I'm realizing some of the things I do myself and to promote it, actually. And so in the finishing strong weekends that I do, I tell a story briefly of a meeting I was in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago. And just the micro version of the story was an older guy. I was probably in my mid 40s, and the guy that seemed like the old guy in the room, who's probably my age now, and we were talking, and most other people were either my age or younger. And it was in that season when Blackberries were going away and iPhones were coming on. And he was making a comment in the middle of the meeting he said something like, yeah, I told my secretary to throw that iPhone away and get me my Blackberry back. Yeah, that's what I'm going to keep using. And I felt like I watched the younger people in the room begin to discount his connection to them. And it was just like this facial body change. And I was just like, everything kind of went into slow motion. I was like, I don't want to be that guy now I don't want to be that guy. And I think there's a piece of us becoming irrelevant. And where I started to think as you were talking, I was going, I've got to quit doing hey, the old guy in the room can do this, or there's whatever. And I promote that piece of, I'm just as relevant, but as soon as I put myself into the box, I've contributed to the other perspective.
And I think that it's also, it maps into your ability to have lifelong learning and curiosity and whatnot around these things. If you take your scenario and turn it around, and the guy who was saying throw that away, like he should have been embracing it, and the younger generations coming together to say, let's get everyone working properly, and reciprocal mentoring and team building and all that kind of thing. There's lots of opportunity.
Yeah. Where are you got one of the other pieces of ageism, and I've experienced it in one way, and I'm guessing as a women, you've experienced it differently, and it's the concept they call the invisibility, and being more invisible. How does that show up, and how are you aware of that in your lives?
Well, I think it's almost kind of the same answer in some respects, in terms of who you see and whether the age that we're at is reflected back to us in everyday life, whether it's, watching TV or going to a movie or reading a book or whatever the case may be. So there's that, but it's also, I talk about it in my story. For me, the invisibility manifests itself in a feeling of diminished worth, diminished value, that kind of thing. And I think there's lots of people that will tell the same story in that respect, in terms of, they're looking for the fresh voice or whatever, the fresh voice, the young voice, the whatever. And you start to see a bit of a, what's the word? I call it a slow dissolve around how you feel you're being listened to. So that's how I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's very, honestly, society has a very difficult time understanding who you are if you don't have a job title attached to you. So that definitely contributes to his invisibility. But I would say I'd be very careful around that kind of conversation, because I do think that it's incumbent on you or me as a person to combat that by having a better belief system internally that you have the value, and that part of that is fighting from internal as well as the external. You're at a cocktail party and they say, what do you do? And you say, I'm retired, and then they're on to the next person because whatever. And that's unfortunately the reality. It's there.
So what's that change in the voice we need to be telling ourselves is when we're experiencing that moment, some sense of we perceive invisibility, and you said to change. What are some of those? What's some of the new narratives we need to be telling ourselves in those moments?
I think one of the things that we can be telling ourselves is as we age, there's not maybe as much pressure, or you can deal with the pressure maybe a little bit differently in terms of your legacy, what you're leaving behind, what you're paying attention to, what's important. So I think a lot of it is reframing, how you feel about those things too. I think one of the courses, course modules, they talked about the big P and the little p. And that one really resonated with me. And I think that one thing that is important is that it doesn't have to be something that is like just mind-blowingly wow. It can be just making a change for one person, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's even someone in your family or someone that you know, or someone that, or a stranger that you just had a great conversation with. I think it's paying attention to those small moments that I think are really important in life for everybody, and not putting that pressure of coming up with the big worthy, big hairy goal. You got to have your entire life. It's changing your thinking around that.
And I think also that it's we all come to this season of life or this time with different lived experiences, and it's valuing every single piece of that. Like there can be wisdom in the little wee things, there can be grand wisdom, but understanding that whole piece, that everyone is different and their life experiences are going to contribute to who they are and what they have to say, and there's value in that.
Yeah. I probably like you guys, because you've entered into this space of trying to lean into to people in our season. Everybody I meet, almost everybody I meet says, have you read the Albert books? I think it's Brooks' book, the From Strength to Strength. And everybody refers that to me. And one of the things I like, there's some things I didn't like about the book. One thing I really liked was when he talked about the crystallized wisdom. And I think that's what I have to keep remembering in those settings, that I do. Those life experiences that I've had bring a unique wisdom. Nobody else has this wisdom. Some of it just comes from things that I've seen and a collection of things I've seen. And so all I offer you is not all, but one of the things I offer you is this experience of wisdom, and hopefully be able to shed just a different perspective on the things that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too, because that's the science on it. I recently reacted very poorly to an editorial in one of the newspapers here that boxed everyone over 50 as having failing cognitive abilities. And I was like, well, there's crystallized experience, there's fluid experience. I was going on like, this is just such a big box to put people into. On that. And once you understand all those pieces, it becomes much easier, but they're not common knowledge. And I think a lot of people need help understanding sort of where they're at and why, and all that kind of thing, to make themselves feel better.
So your third part of your mission, and to champion intergenerational respect and mutual understanding. You've talked about that a little bit in terms of changing the narratives. What are you guys doing in Twinagers to promote that, to move into that with other generations?
Yeah, well, that one's a bit harder, because then all of a sudden your audience goes from here to there. We both have kids that are working age, and I actually have a new grandbaby, which is pretty
congratulations.
Exciting. Awesome. But I think part of it is walking the walk and talking the talk. So that's number one. So if we can be, kind of set ourselves up as a role models just for our kids, and, get their perspective on things. We're looking for different ways of engaging and having the conversations. Like one of the things Les is doing, can I tell this story? One of the things Les is doing is watching The Golden Bachelor with her daughter. So we may put a series out on how she thinks about it versus Les thinks about it. So it's just sort of digging in and trying to, you know, connect those generations on issues or challenges or opportunities that you know cross multi-generations. We look for stories. Like one of our stories we told was the founder of what's called the Village app. And it was a woman in her 50s working with a brand new mom who both had similar needs, different but similar, and then created a business together. So again, it's just sort of trying to figure out ways of telling stories that show the benefit for those connections and making friends in every generation.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. We went to a conference and there was a big conversation at the end about a takeaway, and I put my hand up and I said, you know what? Next week I'm going to go find a friend that's younger than me. Hard to do sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think also there's the other opportunity. We're constantly looking for examples in the workplace where you have multi-generational teams working together and trying to shine a spotlight on that type of story as well. To show some productivity result from it as well.
I think one of my favorite stories that we published, it's on the blog section. It's also looking for stories that are putting a generation in a space where they might not be considered, that would never be something that they would do. So the Joy Uncensored story, which is about a woman in the UK who was a spoken poet. She was a teacher. She got bored with teaching and she was a spoken poet, and she joined this creative collective. And anyway, you'll have to go read the story, but she ended up being a battle rapper.
Oh, yeah. I did see that. That's hilarious.
And they did a film.
It's amazing.
About it. It was the most amazing story. But to me, putting that out there to go like, and to watch the relationships that she walked away with from that experience, and the understanding of the reciprocal understanding that, you know, the old could do what the young could do, and the young can do what the old could do. I love that story. That was one of my favorite stories.
That was a great story there. I just joined something, and it's yet to be seen whether it's going to be great, but there's an organization called Sages and Seekers. And so it's kind of Match.com a little bit on putting somebody our age with somebody. And I thought they're going to be in their 20s, but they're almost all in high school from all over the world. And they've signed up to get to know an older person, some to get their community service credit, and that's fine. Others because they've done it before and they want to do it again. And so that's that sort of, how do you find someone that age to do? So we'll see. I just had our first week this week and it was great. One of the things that comes up a lot in our circle and in our discussions is, where do you live in this season? What do you do about living? And do you move? Do you follow the kids? Do you go retire to, you know, in our case, Florida or Mexico or whatever it is? And we just said, while we love to travel and we'll continue to do that we're going to stay in the neighborhood we've been for 30 years because we want the kid next door, that's the kids next door that are now our kids' age, right? That are having kids, or the school bus in front of the house. Or at least for us, and that's just for us. I don't judge anyone who's done something different. That we don't want to move to the retirement community because and everyone's going to be our age. Everyone's going to be thinking and acting and so much alike. So I really like that being just one of the core parts of your mission is to expand that audience and figure out how do we do that well. We did in a Finishing Strong weekend a few weeks ago. I expanded. I just did one for the 40-year-old. I usually just do it for 60s, and I did the day for the 40-year-olds, and then had the people who've been through Finishing Strong, some guys all over 60, come back and just sort of serve as a panel discussion. And there was just some richness that came out of that, where the 40-year-olds are like, hey, how do we do this more? Would love to connect with you and kind of get some counsel from you as we go forward. So I'm going to do this. I want to have you wrap this part up, because I'm going to have you guys come back, because I got so many more questions for you, especially as it gets to your manifesto. But I do want to leave with the last one, which is you sit there and you dream and you talk and you walk and you do your stuff together. What's the next year look like for Twinagers? What do you see happening over the next year or even two?
Well, Les wants to be on Oprah.
Okay, that's a good goal. That's a reasonable goal.
There's a blue sky goal. Yeah. So, I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently, and I think Cynthia alluded it in the earlier part, but it's really important to both of us. And we've already had anecdotal feedback that what we're doing is helping people. I've had multiple people come and say, I've been so inspired by what you're doing. I applied for this job, or I went to my boss and I did the little or whatever. And so you know that you're making an impact. Mm-hmm. So for me, in the near future, I want to just keep nose to the ground, plugging to increase that impact across the board, and hopefully help more people with just their own lives there. Mm-hmm. We constantly talk about working as advisors or working with brands or all this kind of thing to help with targeting this cohort, and bringing the needs and the wants and the business opportunities to life in a little bit more of a realistic way. So that's also on our agenda.
Yeah. And I would say all the ways that we want to talk to people, whether it's with a collaboration, because at the end of the day, we can't do it all. And I think that's one of the biggest things is like, okay, we need a little small village here, but we're working on collaborations, partnerships that make sense. And I would say the overarching umbrella is telling more stories that humanize and normalize. That's really the two things we want to do. And if, I joke about Oprah, but I would love to do, a content series or a branded content series, that just tells stories and makes it real for people, so that you don't feel isolated as you're or afraid as you're entering this time of life.
Yeah.
And as we say, I don't know how many more times we can listen to Jane Fonda. Like there's just so many more voices out there, right?
Yeah.
So
and I think, like you said, we can't do it all. We're doing our part. I mean, finishing strong is more of a faith-based approach to aging and working with people who are trying to integrate that as I wrap up this season of life. How does that fit in with my faith? And you guys have your niche, and Modern Elder Academy does, and a variety of the people in our space. So hopefully we can all we'll leave our mark and leave our fingerprint on whatever part of the world that we want to serve. So you guys have been awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with Twinagers over the next 12 months and 24 and 10 years. And maybe we'll just be trading podcast here for the next few years. But thank you guys very much, and look forward to seeing you again. So
wonderful. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for joining another Finishing Strong podcast today. You can learn more about what Leslie and Cynthia are up to by going to their website, twin-agers.com, or on their Instagram site, simply Twinagers. You can also learn more about us at www.finishing-strong.org, where you can register for one of our upcoming events or sign up for a retirement coaching session with me. Thanks again for joining us.